I'm Tenitra Batiste, and is it okay that my fave part of Kevin Stefanski's presser was Matty Ice referencing Jermaine Dupri? Gotta like that.
I'm Maria Martin, and to take that a step further, I need Kevin Stefanski to start saying where the players play.
I'm Aaron Freeman, and if you want to know why Kevin Stefanski chose Atlanta, I got two words for you. It's B and John.
I'm Jarvis Davis. I just wanted him to pronounce the word correctly. It's not players, it's player.
ATL! ATL!
Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcons Squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcons Squad Show starts now.
The Falcons Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me, our Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, the guy who won't give Matt Ryan a break, even though he tried to get for the culture, Jarvis Davis, and 11 Alive anchor Maria Martin. The Squad Show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. So is Rees the right guy to handle the Falcons offense? We'll discuss. And Stefanski seems to be confident in his QB1, but did he give a clue on where he stands with QB2? We'll debate it. And then there were two we'll download on who we think gets the coveted GM job. But first, let's talk about the man who filled the Falcons' other opening and why he chose to be here. So, Jarvis, when Matt Ryan was introduced as the president of football, he was asked about hiring an offensive-minded coach, and he essentially said that wasn't necessarily going to be the case. But when Matt was in a more recent interview, he said he wanted an offense that runs the football, that plays into play action. And knowing play action, running the football, that's Kevin Stefanski's bread and butter. Does it seem like to you he's the guy Matt had in mind all along?
Yeah, I think so. Because here's the thing. And that was one of the things I was thinking about, because I was at the press conference and, you know, listening to Matt talk and talking about the vision and what he wants in the coach. Mm-hmm. He talked about how getting that spot, and how the quarterback playing the quarterback position is going to help him just from a football experience and be able to talk ball standpoint, right? So I was just like, man, there's no way that you're sitting in a meeting with a guy like Kevin Stefanski, who was very similar in style of play that you played in. You had a lot of success in, and had like a borderline Hall of Fame career. And there's no way you can sit up here and say, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna draw the line right down the middle and say, oh yeah, I'm not gonna be drawn to this guy. I'm not gonna be, I'm not gonna gravitate towards him, selecting him as a strong candidate. So when we find out that Kevin Stefanski was the guy, like, that made total sense, because when you start talking ball and Matt Ryan is so fresh out of it, right? It just makes too much sense that those minds and offensive philosophies and him having success in that just weren't going to align. It just made all the sense in the world.
Yeah, Maria. And when you look at Kevin Stefanski's background, Matt Ryan's background, some of the things that Jarvis even said about those connection points, whether tangible or intangible, do you feel like Stefanski was maybe Matt's candidate all along?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to read the tea leaves, just to take your phrase, Tenitra, that you say a lot, if you want to read those, I feel like Matt was high on him from the very beginning. There's that Philadelphia connection that they've both mentioned a couple different times, and Kevin being a big fan of Matt from a distance for a long time, because obviously these guys weren't close for years. But yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of Jarvis, I think the offensive philosophy is so similar in what Matt wants out of a football team offensively and what Kevin wants offensively. And just him talking about being physical on the offensive side of the ball, completely making sure that he drives home that point, that physicality is going to be a big thing. We're going to run the football. Play action pass will be a big thing. These are all things that Matt's really aligned with. And so when you look at it, when Kevin started to be the name that I guess, inched itself as the front runner in this conversation, it made a ton of sense. And I do feel like in the way that Matt talks, Kevin won him over pretty quickly. I mean, it does seem that way, just because he said he really separated himself from the very beginning. And really, of the candidates that were available at that given time that they could hire, Kevin does make a lot of sense in terms of offensively, just the scheme and everything that Matt wants to accomplish here in Atlanta now as the president. And two, one thing to keep in mind, you know, we all had opinions whether or not Kevin Stefanski was the right guy, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more. But now that you see what happened in Cleveland, how tumultuous that hiring process was, how there were a handful of guys that had pulled their names out. Obviously, Todd Monken, now the head coach there, and those of us that follow Georgia football know him very well. But it was just an indicator that there is more to the story in Cleveland than just Kevin Stefanski. And I think if you didn't already know that, you're not paying attention to what's happened in Cleveland in the last, decade plus.
Yeah, because that meltdown that they had when they said, oh, by the way, defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, who we pretty much been telling you were the heir apparent, you're not. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot that we still don't know about the debacle that was the Cleveland Browns for Kevin Stefanski those last couple of seasons, that had a lot less to do with what he was doing on the field and on the sidelines than what was going on in that front office and that organization overall. So good point, Maria. And what about for you, Aaron, when you look at some of the things that Matt said in his presser, some of the things that Stefanski said in his, do you feel like Stefanski was kind of the front runner all along?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. You know, as Maria and Jarvis have discussed already, you know, you can imagine Matt Ryan going into the situation of not necessarily being married to an offensive coach, but obviously that's going to be his natural preference, being a quarterback and basically choosing a coach. It's like, well, what type of offense would I like to play in if I was, you know, the quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons? And I think it's very obvious to, you know, in Matt's eyes, it would probably be someone like Kevin Stefanski. Maybe you could throw a Clint Kubiak into the mix, but because of that experience that Stefanski has, because Kubiak is with the Seattle and you'd have to wait, and then you would be sitting there, you know, like the Raiders and Cardinals are, just kind of like in this three-way race, you know, potentially if the Falcons had waited for a guy like Kubiak to see who's going to be able to lure him over the next 2 weeks before the Super Bowl and all that stuff. And so I think the Falcons, not to say that they settle for Kevin Stefanski, but it became a very clear choice for them that Stefanski brings a lot of the same things that you would potentially get in Kubiak, plus a lot more in terms of that, you know, having 6 years of experience, having a guy that was able to lead a dysfunctional organization, as you just kind of broke down, Maria and T, in Cleveland to the playoffs twice in his first 4 years. You know, Kevin Stefanski, I think, ultimately checks a lot of the boxes that Matt Ryan probably went into this thing looking for. You know, not to say that he was overly biased in that, but some of those biases, I think, wound up, you know, resonating when you sort of get into a room with Kevin Stefanski.
Yeah, and like you said, Free, it was sort of a gamble to wait for Clint Kubiak, because there are now rumblings, and there have been rumblings for a week or so, that Kubiak's going to stay with Seattle. Now, granted, that may have been because indications were that the only two jobs that would be available would be the Cardinals and Raiders, and you can't blame him for then skipping this cycle and saying, yeah, man, I'll just wait until 2027. But ultimately speaking, you make a great point. What if the Falcons were still in a situation where they were still looking for a head coach along with those two teams, and everybody else had gotten sort of the pick of the litter, and Clint Kubiak then decides, no, really, I'm going to just stay with Seattle? Then, yeah, you find yourself in a bit of a conundrum. So, yeah, the Falcons really kind of dodged that bullet just in terms of the head coach that they ended up getting versus what could have happened if they waited a little longer. Although, that said, it wasn't like they were rushing through the process. I still feel like Matt Ryan was thorough in what he was doing in making the final selection for Stefanski. Now, throughout Stefanski's introductory presser, he made it very clear he wanted to be in Atlanta, Jarvis. But what do you think was the biggest draw to him that maybe we haven't talked about?
I don't have to be in Cleveland anymore, because that is a horrible organization. You know, I was
is
like,
it not
man,
Cleveland? All right, man, I love this place.
That's right. I hope they want me. That's basically what he said in the presser. He's like, hey, I hope they I hope they feel the same way. I hope the feeling is mutual, when he got the opportunity to interview. So yeah, and I understand it, because a lot of times when there is a certain a level of zeal that you have when you get that first opportunity to do whatever you thrive in life to do, right? And you have that, and it's up to the company to help you maintain that by support and by giving you everything that you need to be able to have success. And we saw that, right? In the first 4 years, like Aaron laid out, they made the playoffs. So, but however, when you're forced to go after Deshaun Watson, if you got 172 pending civil charges against them, you know what I'm saying? And then you guarantee a contract and just blow up your whole salary cap situation. And so, yeah, he gets beat down. That can happen. That he's a human, right? And I know a lot of people say, "Oh, he got a job to do," blah blah blah. Yeah, okay, I understand that, but we're humans first. Like, you don't like your job every day, so you got to think from that standpoint. So every time that you look at what Stefanski had to deal with, you kind of understand why there may have been a drop off, right? Because some of the things that you were doing and that was working for you when you first came in probably wasn't necessarily working when you went in that fourth and fifth year or whatever. So I believe that he made it a point to lay that out, because of he was ready to get the heck up out of Cleveland, and I don't blame him.
Yeah, I mean, who wants 15-degree weather that feels like 5 below on a regular basis during the wintertime? Yeah, we've gotten it for the last week and a half, but I'm talking about this is all day, every day for Cleveland. But also, Maria, real talk, on our squad show Monday, we talked about players, right? And the question was
players or players?
No, this would be players.
All right, got it. just wanted clarification.
Yeah.
Mess for me
now wait a minute. Now, if I was talking about Bone Thugs and Harmony, yes, we would be talking about players. But I'm talking about the people on the football field, so that's going to be players.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and don't let me go down the rabbit hole on BTH, because I will. But ultimately, that squad show, it was so telling, Maria, when Jarvis, Aaron, and Tori essentially answered this question of, are there any players other than Myles Garrett who would be attractive to you that maybe Stefanski would be interested in bringing here? And I mean, Maria, it was almost crickets, other than maybe Njoku, or if Judkins was healthy, if you will, but it was crickets. So that was kind of telling about, why you want to get the hell out of Dodge, because you don't have any roster to work with, and you don't know what that roster is going to look like going forward. But we know what that draw for Stefanski was as far as being here. But what do you think? And you laid out some of them. Any other things you wanted to lay out in terms of maybe what the draw for the Falcons was to him?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I could sit here and talk for an hour about why Atlanta would be a better decision than Cleveland, obviously. And it's not like Kevin Stefanski had a choice in the matter in terms of his departure from Cleveland. But all that being said, Atlanta is such an attractive destination for so many reasons. I mean, you talk about the human aspect of it. If you're just talking about for your family and for your personal life, like, this is infinitely a better city to live in. So that's check number one. Check number two, you're moving over to a division that is very winnable, with a roster that's built to win. Granted, there is some things that they got to figure out within the offseason to get them to a place of winning at a consistent rate. And I say it like it's easy, and this is a team that hasn't been in the playoffs one time since I've been working here. But it will, and I promise it will at some point.
The Maria curse continues.
I mean, listen, someone brought that up to me, not to digress, and it's not about me, but someone brought that up to me walking out of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and I said, no, let me remind you, I got a World Series. I got 2 national championships. I got an Eastern Conference Finals run. It ain't my curse. So bye. It's not my curse.
And a World Cup. And, I'm sorry, and an MLS Cup.
No, that was right before me. No, I know, it's so sad. But I would love to take credit for it. But no.
I was just trying to show you some love, man.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. No, but I think there's so many good things about the way the roster is. There's so many young, talented players. And you mentioned the 3 players that you would think of with the Browns. I can name way more than 3 here in Atlanta. And it is a very attractive place for players and for coaches alike. And even though it's a team that has been absent of the playoffs, it's a team that's built to be able to make it there at some point. And you have an owner willing to spend whatever amount of money to do different things for the franchise and the organization. And, it's been so tumultuous in Cleveland, and just from an ownership standpoint, from a franchise standpoint, historically with the Cleveland Browns, it's kind of a disaster. And so he looks at the Falcons and says, okay, it's not like you guys have ever lifted a Lombardi trophy, but there is a very good opportunity to do that there. And why not go work for someone who's hungrier than ever to do that? And the guy that was just there and watched it get ripped away from his fingertips.
Yeah. And for you, Aaron, what do you think when you look at Stefanski? We know why Atlanta was attractive for him, but what maybe makes him or made him attractive for Atlanta, in addition to, of course, what you've already shared?
I mean, the marriage of Bijan Robinson and Kevin Stefanski and their offense sounds pretty good. We know Stefanski likes to run the football. That was sort of when that Browns team was playing their best for him in Cleveland. It was a lot of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and a really good offensive line. And I think he's looking at some of the things that the Falcons have here in Atlanta that kind of parallel that. We'll obviously see if Tyler Algier is back, but Bijan's a pretty good starting point. Sort of, you can figure some things out in terms of RB2 when you have arguably the best RB1 in the NFL and Bijan Robinson.
Sad.
That Tyler is, we'll see. But and this offensive line is a good starting point for them. They have to avoid sort of the situation that happened in Cleveland where that offensive line got pretty old. And that led to some of the issues offensively these last couple of years with injuries and whatnot. So the Falcons are going to have to avoid that issue down the road. But, this is when you look at what Kevin Stefanski wants to do offensively, you look at where the Falcons offense has primarily been built these last couple of years as they've been trying to make it to the playoffs, which is that run game. It's kind of a perfect marriage.
Yeah. And when I look at the Falcons and why they may have been interested in Stefanski as well, I think it's what we've all said, which is for a long time in Cleveland, he did more with less. And with them knowing what their roster looks like, there's every opportunity for him to do less with more or even more with more. So, is now Tommy Rees, is he the right guy to handle the Falcons offense? We'll take that under further review. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by Rocket Money. Let's be real. Managing your finances can feel overwhelming between subscriptions you forgot about, bills that keep going up, and trying to figure out where all your money actually goes each month. Well, it's easy to feel like you're losing control. And who has time to track every transaction or hunt down hidden fees? That's where Rocket Money comes in, the personal finance app that helps you take control. It finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. And you might be shocked when Rocket Money shows you that you're paying as much as you are for some of those subscriptions, like some of those subscriptions that say they give you a 7-day trial, a 30-day trial, and then you completely forget about it. Well, Rocket Money would have already saved you money. And you'll love how it tracks all your subscriptions and lets you cancel them right in the app with just a few taps. No more hunting down customer service numbers. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join rocketmoney.com/lockedon. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. This episode of our squad show is also brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though? That part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, which is with the fans. Pulled up the Game Time app, picked up an upcoming NBA game, and had tickets locked in within minutes. And you're going to love seeing the all-in price up front. No surprise fees at checkout, and being able to see the view from the seat before buying. Well, that makes the decision easy. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co. That's gametime.co, not .com. Gametime.co. So, Maria, when we think about Kevin Stefanski's last 2 seasons with the Cleveland Browns, as we've kind of talked about before, he did relinquish his play calling duties to his offensive coordinator. Now, he said in his presser this week that he trusted Tommy Rees, the new offensive coordinator, to handle those duties here. Do you think Rees is the right guy to handle the Falcons offense?
Man, that's so hard for me to say, just because there isn't really a proven track record with Tommy Rees as a play caller in the NFL. And, both Kevin Stefanski and Matt Ryan said they understand that there's not a ton of experience there in terms of calling plays in the National Football League, but as we know, he has a ton of experience calling plays in general. Offensive coordinator at Alabama for Nick Saban in 2023, which a lot of people are going to point to that as a down year, quote unquote, for the University of Alabama. But remember, it was Jalen Milroe as the quarterback, and that presented its own challenges when it comes to what I believe Tommy Rees wants to do offensively. And I think one thing to keep in mind, I've probably brought up on the show in the past, is the difference between Raheem Morris hiring an offensive coordinator that had never called plays before in his life in Zach Robinson, and then all of a sudden has to do that in the NFL, versus a Kevin Stefanski hiring somebody that's been with him and has had the experience of calling plays, even though he is very young and inexperienced, is that Kevin is going to have his thumb a little bit more on the offense than I think Raheem ever would have. And obviously, I know Raheem has had position jobs on the offensive side of the ball throughout his career, but it is a little bit different when Kevin Stefanski's been an offensive coordinator before. It's kind of just been his whole bread and butter his entire career. So I do think that he has enough people, and that does not mean Matt Ryan, because Matt's made it very clear he's not there to be the OC. He's not there to be the play caller. He's not going to even put his 2 cents on it, which I don't know if I buy that. I think he may say something if things are going awry. I don't think that he would really overstep boundaries, but I do think he would give his opinion if he needed to. You know what I mean? But no, I think it's hard for me to give like a full stamp of confidence and approval just because he hasn't done it yet, and we have no idea what it looks like. But I think if anything, have some confidence in Kevin Stefanski and Matt Ryan, because Matt's going to vet these guys better than anybody, right? He's going to talk to him, hey, draw up exactly what you're thinking philosophy-wise. Let's walk through this. What does it look like with the pieces in place? What do you feel like we're missing? And if Tommy doesn't give the answers that are sufficient enough for Matt has every right to be like, no, this can't be the OC. So I have confidence in that. It's just the lack of play calling experience in the National Football League and the youth that gives me a little bit of pause, but look at all these hot up-and-coming offensive coordinators we've seen throughout the last few years. Who's to say Tommy Rees can't be the next?
Indeed. And for you, Aaron, you think Rees is the right guy to handle the Falcons offense?
We'll see. Similar answer to what Maria said, where the body of work does not necessarily give you a high degree of confidence. But sure, as Maria pointed out, like there's a reason why Tommy Rees has been considered an up-and-comer. And that reason could manifest in Atlanta with more talent to work with, as we just discussed, than he had necessarily in Cleveland. As Maria said, you have 9 games of basically coordinating the worst offense in football last year. And so you can't really point to that and go like, hey, this guy's going a guaranteed success with that body of work. But as we've discussed, there are reasons why he's been considered this up and comer. There's a reason why Kevin Stefanski kind of sees him kind of potentially as a younger version of him, sort of talking about with our colleague Tori McElhaney the other day with, sort of him, Kevin Stefanski referring to his sort of tutelage under Gary Kubiak in Minnesota got him to where he was, and sort of him kind of being the same thing for Tommy Rees here in Atlanta. So we'll see if it plays out, but it's hard to sit here and feel confident. Obviously there's a chance that Tommy Rees is that next superstar up and coming coordinator. And, no one thought Ben Johnson was Ben Johnson until he proved he was Ben Johnson. No one thought Liam Cohen was Liam Cohen until, he proved it out there. And so Tommy Rees will have every opportunity to prove that he can be that sort of next up and coming bright mind. But, we hear about that so much nowadays just because there is such a thirst for that next great play caller that's going to revolutionize the NFL. And a lot of guys get the opportunity. Some of those guys succeed, probably more than we would like, don't necessarily succeed. And so, it's one of those things with Tommy Rees where it's kind of a coin toss, which bracket and bucket he's going to ultimately find himself in. But for the time being, I can understand why some people are skeptical. I can understand why some people are optimistic. It's just kind of a coin toss.
So, Jarvis, I'm going to throw a two-part question at you that I also want Maria and Aaron to circle back and answer. So part one of the question is still the same, which is, do you think Rees is the right guy to handle the Falcons offense? But here's part two for all three of you. Do you have more of a comfort zone with Rees being a new play caller with Stefanski, or did you have more of a comfort zone than you did with Robinson calling plays under Morris? So,
oh gosh. Well, I will raise my hand. I'm skeptical of the hire because here's the thing. I'm going to go back to that conversation that Matt Ryan and Kevin Stefanski had with each other. And Kevin started talking about his philosophy and what his offense wants to do, what he wants to establish. Now, I know people can say, oh, he's been learning up under him and he's been right up under his wing and he's been feeding the little baby milk offensive plays and the call and everything and stringing them along and learning him how to be a good play caller. Yeah, I said that old term. Yes, I did. But it's hard to replicate something. And a lot of times we try to replicate something, it's not as good as the original. So that's why I say you were hired because of your philosophy and what you like to do on offense. And then you're going to then delegate that to someone who doesn't have that much experience calling plays in the NFL. I have questions. I'm skeptical of it. So, but then, as we go along, and I think that once you start implementing the offense, and obviously when you start getting the training camp and then preseason games and all that stuff, that may change. My opinion can change. But right now, I have questions. I have to ask questions. And as far as the Tommy Rees versus Zach Robinson, man, get Zach Robinson up out of here, man. I don't. He is just so. He seems like he changes with the wind. He was talking in his opening presser with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers being introduced as offensive coordinator for the Bucs, and to hear him say that the base of his offense is under center, and he mentioned Sean McVay's name as if you can't hold on to that, right? Like you got to take the whatever out your mouth because you can't say, hey, this is Sean McVay. The base of the offense is up under, what I want to say for you. I see why you smiling.
Okay.
I'm censoring myself today. You know what I'm saying? But I think that when you have y'all gonna make me lose my train of thought. Why are you doing this to me? But I think that Zach Robinson has an identity problem because when you say something like that and then you kind of rewind back to what he was as a play caller here, where he had to stay in the pistol and Michael Penix Jr. knees broke, so he can't get under center and he likes to run out of the pistol, and then soon as doggone Michael Penix goes down, you bring Kirk in here, and then next thing you know, you're under center, play action, the offense got a little flow to it. Who are you? Yes, I don't want none of that here. So I'd rather deal with Tommy Rees than have to deal with Zach Robinson and not really knowing who he is as a play caller, because Sean McVay can be the basis of what you want to do, but eventually you got to come into your own, bro. And to hear him say some crap like that, I'm just like, man, come on, dog. Like, I'm glad he's up out of here.
So I think Jarvis went around the way, but I think he basically answered my question about whether or not he was more skeptical when Raheem Morris brought in Zach Robinson than he is Tommy Rees with Kevin Stefanski. So I think I got the gist of what he feels with his diatribe on Zach Robinson.
Sorry, I had to go on that.
No, that's why I let you ride with that.
It was burned in my soul. Sorry.
It was. Exactly. So that's why I let you have that. But Maria, for you, when you think back a couple seasons ago, finding out that Zach Robinson was going to be the OC under Raheem Morris, were you more skeptical then, or are you more skeptical now with Kevin Stefanski naming Tommy Rees as the OC?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely more skeptical of Zach Robinson, and it goes back to what I was saying previously. Like, I know that a lot of people don't understand how hard it is to call plays in a football game, okay? I actually live it and breathe it. Not that I'm doing it, but I've seen it done. I know what a play call sheet looks like. There's probably plenty in my office right now. It is so hard to do that at any level. And if you have no experience doing that, and then you are given the keys to an NFL offense and asked to go be successful, you're set up for failure 9 times out of 10. There are people that'll do it, and there's tons of people that we can name that have surprised a bunch of people and they've never done it before, and then all of a sudden they're great. But I think it's really hard to set someone up in that scenario, and so I was always very skeptical of that. I think just doing it in preseason games really just doesn't give you the experience that you need. And I get it. Like, you got to do it at some point if you're going to be a play caller, but I just felt like, especially for Raheem, that was a huge risk because you're a head coach for the second time in your career, and a lot rides on how successful your coordinators are. We saw that with both of the coordinators that came through Raheem's tenure that didn't work out. So,
and like you said, with your ones at that. So you've got this new OC. He's coaching in the preseason, but he ain't coaching with the ones. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, for sure. And two, I think this gives you a little bit more stability. Now we can look at the quarterback position and say there are some things to figure out in that realm.
Yeah.
But in Cleveland, Kevin Stefanski, which is not Tommy Rees, but he goes through 13 different quarterbacks in Cleveland, and he's talked about how much he understands about the development of a quarterback. Well, if we're going to ride on the fact that let's just go under the assumption that Michael Penix Jr. is going to be ready to go and he's the quarterback or whatever, just for the sake of argument, right? If you put him out there and you've got a guy like Kevin Stefanski who has a proven track record of developing young quarterbacks, and you've got a guy that he has stood on the table for, I have a little bit more confidence in that, because when you're a head coach again, he just was in Cleveland, but now he gets the job in Atlanta, and you stand on the table for someone who's 33, turning 34 years old, and you have a quarterback who was the NFL MVP, who almost won a Super Bowl, also standing on a table for this guy, you got to have at least a little confidence that they know what they're talking about here.
Yeah.
Well, for me, if you're asking the question how I felt about Zach Robinson on January 29, 2024 versus how I feel about Tommy Rees on January 29, 2026, I'm a lot more skeptical of Tommy Rees than I was back in 2024. And obviously I think part of that is fueled by having a lot of optimism about what Zach Robinson was going to bring to the table 2 years ago, and that kind of fizzling out. He had spent 5 years in the Sean McVay, sort of finishing school. And up to that point, almost every, coordinator, coach, play caller that had gone to that finishing school wound up being successful elsewhere in the NFL, whether we look at Kevin O'Connell, Zach Taylor, et cetera, Matt LaFleur, et cetera, in terms of those things. And so it just felt like, oh, well, Zach Robinson's clearly going to be the next one. Now, that didn't necessarily manifest itself. And you contrast that with Kevin Stefanski's, school. It's like, okay, Ken Dorsey, Drew Petzing, Tommy Rees are the guys that have worked under him that are play callers now in the NFL. And it's like, you don't have as much of a hit rate with those guys. Now, that doesn't mean that Tommy Rees is destined to fail. And, that sort of natural skepticism that you have because Zach Robinson didn't live up to the hype means that Tommy Rees won't live up to the hype is not fair to Tommy Rees or this situation. So Tommy Rees, as we've discussed, could actually absolutely be a success story. But at least when you just look at the checklist of things that you want to see in terms of, Tommy Rees coming up, in a proven offense, he doesn't necessarily have that going for him than Zach Robinson. He does have the experience of actually calling plays at some level. And so that learning curve is something, but as we've already discussed, like the success hasn't necessarily been to the degree that we wanted to say, oh, this guy's a guaranteed slam dunk of a hire at this point in time. And, you know, the narrative around Zach Robinson 2 years ago was this is a slam dunk hire. He's a coveted offensive coordinator. He interviewed for like 5 other jobs, but he's coming to Atlanta, and this is a huge win for Raheem and all this sort of stuff. And again, that didn't live up to the hype. And so I think that leads us to be a little bit more skeptical of Tommy Rees when it comes to any hype surrounding him. But yeah, in terms of who I felt more confident at the time of their hiring, yeah, it was Zach Robinson, but that virtually doesn't mean anything at this point.
What did I tell you, Aaron? Zach Robinson's going to go to Tampa and light him up, baby. It's going to be like a 180-degree turn. I'm telling you, it's just the Falcon way. He's going to go over there and look like the offensive coordinator, the best offensive coordinator in the NFC South. It's going to happen.
But you can clearly see how triggered Aaron is. That's a Falcons fan trigger, because he's like, yeah, I was 2 years ago optimistic, and look what happened.
And look what he's gonna tear up. He's not gonna tear up the league. He's gonna tear up that Bucs defense in practice, because that's the only time he had that type of success where he deserves to get another offensive coordinator gig. Sorry.
Oh boy, 2026 when these two teams link up is going to be straight fun. So Kevin Stefanski seems to be truly confident in QB1. Did he give a clue on where he stands with QB2? We'll unpack that next up. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper, didn't we just talk about that? Well, wasn't the right fit? You know how important that is when you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for. Trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the candidates faster, the right ones, Indeed. So if you need to hire someone, say for a show, you can go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what you need. Real experience, not just a resume buzzword. And instead of struggling to get your job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates faster. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this postcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Do it the right way with Indeed. So, Aaron, Kevin Stefanski seemed relatively optimistic about Michael Penix Jr. and his rehab progress when he spoke about it earlier this week. You get the feeling Stefanski truly is confident in who he has as QB1?
I don't know. I think the idea of Michael Penix right now is very intriguing to Kevin Stefanski than currently the reality of Michael Penix, because the reality of Michael Penix is he's in a trainer's room, and you've heard both Matt Ryan and Kevin Stefanski talk about that, where like the focus right now for Michael Penix is just to get healthy and go through this rehab process. But I think when Kevin Stefanski thinks that next step in that process of getting Michael Penix back on the field and with the arm talent that he has and all the flashes and tools and things that we've discussed ad nauseum over the last year and a half with Michael Penix in terms of what he brings to the table, I think it's very intriguing for Kevin Stefanski, like it was for the previous regime, what Michael Penix can be at this point in time. But I don't know if I can sit here and say with any degree of confidence that Kevin Stefanski, is in love with the idea of Michael Penix, just because, like, when is Michael Penix going to be back? Some people say it's going to be April. Some people say it's going to be week 1. Some people say it's going to be later than that. You never know when it comes to when Michael Penix is going to come back at this point in time. So, I just think right now the idea of Michael Penix is very intriguing for Kevin Stefanski, but ultimately it's going to be the reality when he steps on the field, and we just don't know when that's going to be.
Yeah, we really don't, if we're being honest about that. And so, Jarvis, when you think about Stefanski's comments on Michael Penix Jr., seemingly optimistic comments, no doubt, you get the feeling he's truly confident about QB1?
Yeah, whenever he gets on the field. But I feel like it's obvious that he recognizes the type of talent that he has. And you talk about the arm strength, you talk about, the above the shoulder rating, so to speak. When you think about being able to go through your progressions, he was very explicit talking about how, a lot of times when young quarterbacks, those guys on the field, you kind of see like they kind of do the whole point and shoot type deal, right? If my first read isn't there, I'm going to the check down. Or for athletic quarterbacks, they taking off running. And he said he's not like that. He goes through his progressions. And when you think about having that as a foundation, I think he sees it as an opportunity to be able to build something, but he just has to get healthy first.
Yeah. And for you, Maria, when you think about Stefanski's comments about Michael Penix Jr., do you feel like he's truly confident in QB1?
Here's what we're going to learn about Kevin Stefanski, okay? He's not going to say a whole lot. He's very succinct, very to the point. And so, I think it was hard from that press conference to say, oh, this guy's obsessed with Mike. I just didn't get that vibe. And it's not that he's not. It's just he didn't really say a whole lot. I think he's excited. I'm sure he's excited about the idea, much to Aaron and Jarvis's points, of a young quarterback that he can work with and develop. He's healthy. I think all those things are probably fair, but I don't think he stood on the table and was like, he's the quarterback of the future. None of that happened. And so I think to kind of pull this whole narrative of, there's so much belief in Penix because Stefanski said XYZ, he really didn't say any of that stuff. Again, he could believe that. I think also that's a really safe play by Kevin because much to Jarvis's point and to Aaron's point is he has had conversations with Mike and where have they all been? The training room. It's how's your rehab going? How is your body? It's not let me see you throw. It's there's a little bit of a difference. Okay, there's a little bit of a different narrative happening with Kevin Stefanski right now. So look, I think it was smart the way he played it because who knows what's going to happen with the quarterback situation here. So I think it would have been unwise for either him or Matt to stand on the table and really say that Mike is the future, and not that we don't want that to be the case. It's just a lot can happen between now and the season. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say Kevin is obsessed with him because he just really didn't say a whole lot.
Yeah. Now, QB1 may be a little bit closer to being determined. As we sit here, it's still Michael Penix Jr., right? But that QB2 might be TBD. Granted, Kevin Stefanski has a deep history with Kirk Cousins because he was his QB coach and coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings. But for you, considering that and the fact that Cousins and the organization reportedly agreed to a contract restructure earlier this month, what's your sense on Kirk Cousins being brought back?
I think it's a possibility, right? The restructure, for those that don't understand it, basically the Falcons got cap savings right now. They can cut Kirk. They'll basically be forced to cut Kirk before March 13th or whatever. And that allows Kirk to basically be able to shop himself around. There's, I think, roughly a third of current NFL teams don't necessarily know who their week one starter is going to be. So Kirk could have options. The issue with Kirk is going to be if those options are A, going to guarantee him the starting job, and B, not going to draft a player like, let's say, for instance, the Raiders. Everybody expects them to take a quarterback number one overall. Kirk ain't going there because he knows there's going to be quarterback breathing down his neck. Minnesota's potentially an option as a homecoming, but J.J. McCarthy's going to be breathing down his neck. Here in Atlanta, the potential is there for Michael Penix once he comes back from injury to sort of leapfrog Kirk. So Kirk is going to want to go to a place where he doesn't have to worry about that. Yeah. And the question, of course, is going to be whether or not he's going to get that offer. And I think if he doesn't get that offer from another team, I think there's a real possibility that he could decide, okay, well, if I want to play, Atlanta is my best spot, given all the factors, the familiarity with Kevin Stefanski, the players, all that sort of stuff. And I also think there's an opportunity for Kirk, as we saw last weekend, if the offer isn't there, he can always do something else and go into television, right?
Yeah.
Him and Matt Ryan can switch spots, and basically, I'll take Matt Ryan's job.
Kirk's good at it.
Yeah, he was very good.
He's
not surprised.
He's very good at it.
Yeah.
And so I think Kirk will have options, and the Falcons will be one of those options. But it's hard to sit here and say, where on that tier of options the Falcons will ultimately rank. But I think there's certainly a real possibility that Kirk is starting for the Atlanta Falcons in 2026. But it's by no means a slam dunk.
Yeah. And what for you, Jarvis, is your sense on Kirk coming back or being brought back?
I don't think Kirk wants to come back. That's just me. I mean, I understand the relationship that he had with Kevin Stefanski. He had one of his better years when Stefanski was calling plays. Stefanski's not calling plays now, so I don't understand. I get why people try to make that connection, but I don't see him being on this roster. I don't think Kirk wants to be here, and I don't think it's anything negative. It's just that he was brought here under a certain understanding or expectation of how things were going to be for him as the quarterback for this team, and it ended up being different.
Yeah,
like I said, we're human beings. It ain't no love lost. It's just that when people tell you something, more than likely you're going to believe them. And when they don't line up with what you told them, it's okay for you to, that's breach of verbal contract, human being stuff, right? I think that he's kind of over this situation because of how the last regime handled his whole starting status. So I would totally understand that from man to man. I totally get that. So yeah, I don't see him being on this roster.
And you, Maria, when you think about all of those ties, if you will, you think about the restructure of the contract, you think about Kirk and his turn on TV just last week. I mean, what's your sense on him being brought back or coming back?
Yeah, I mean, I was happy to see Kirk get that opportunity because, again, I thought he was great. And I think he has a really bright future in television. I think that Kirk wants to be anywhere that he's a starting quarterback. I really do believe that, even if it is here in Atlanta. But the problem here, there's a couple of different problems with Kirk's name attached to it. Number one, the restructuring of the contract indicates, to Aaron's point, there's an opportunity to shop around. And clearly the Falcons are thinking, how can we get this off the books? And that's going to be a big conversation for them. And it makes sense to let go of his contract and obviously not let go technically. But I think that's just a large amount of money that they've been sitting on to something that hasn't really worked out how anybody wanted it. Kirk at the forefront of that, of course, as Jarvis pointed out. But then another thing that's weirdly attached to Kirk is that, let's say Mike really isn't ready to go for game one, right? He comes back a couple games into the season and you have Kirk Cousins starting. Let's say Kirk is balling out. How do you take the ball away from a starting quarterback that's doing that? That's going to be really tough. And how do you look Kirk in the face and do that again? And that would also be very tough. So I think we've mentioned it before. The Kevin Stefanski, Kirk Cousins connection's really cool. Had circumstances been different, I think timing would have been different and watching them reconnect would have been cool. I just find it very hard to believe that Kirk will be here next year. And if he is, I will be very surprised.
Yeah, understood. So there are two left. Falcons are down to 2 for the third and final piece in the triumvirate. Who do these guys think Matt Ryan is going to go with? Well, we'll talk about that when we look ahead. This episode of our Falcons Squad Show is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. And you can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. So for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150, all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. So take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. So Jarvis, we're down to 2 men standing. The Falcons have narrowed it to Chicago Bears AGM Ian Cunningham and Houston Texans AGM James Liipfert for their GM search. Who do you guys think gets the job? Starting with you, Jarvis.
I think that I think it's still Ian Cunningham, and there's several reasons why I have been thinking about coming off of it, but I'm going to stick to my guns because I feel like Ian Cunningham was the guy that Matt was very interested in, obviously with the connection with Ryan Poles, being the head man and being in his wedding. I don't know if he was the best man, but I know he was in his wedding. So yeah, that obviously that relationship right there matters a lot. So I believe that Cunningham is still going to continue to be the guy, but I do believe that with Liipfert coming in kind of like on the back end of the seemingly of this process, I feel like he's definitely a lot closer than what I may feel that he might be, because when you have somebody come out of the woodwork essentially like that, you know, that lets me know that he impressed really well in an interview. So I think it's going to be close, but I feel like Ian Cunningham is ultimately going to be the guy.
Yeah, and Maria, we've kind of seen throughout this process, when you look at the head coach that was selected and you look at some of the staffers that were selected, relationships matter. But as Jarvis mentioned, Ian Cunningham, who is also considered for the president of football, is now a finalist for the GM position with the Falcons. But there is a guy who's right there in competition with him in James Liipfert. So for you, who do you think is that job?
Oof, I don't know. This business is all about relationships, and we've been saying Ian Cunningham for a really long time because of the relationships that Jarvis mentioned that I think we've detailed ad nauseum here on this podcast in the past. However, I've got this sneaky feeling it's going to be James Liipfert. That is on no grounds or basis other than me just assuming that this is probably a little bit further along, kind of like Jarvis said, than possible. And, I have heard things about Ian Cunningham in the past in that he was not hired in the past for different reasons. And that may be a deterrent for Matt Ryan, or Ryan Poles can convince Matt that he is ready to be a general manager. That, that's one of two options for Ian, who has been a finalist for these scenarios in years past. James Liipfert also has ties to this area. And so although he doesn't have ties to Matt Ryan, him having the Georgia Tech tie is great. He's done an unbelievable job in terms of college scouting at the NFL level. And that is very, very valuable for a team that does not have a first round draft pick. He will be able to navigate that in a way that I think a lot of people don't have experience in doing. So I would really look out for this to be potentially the scenario that plays out here. A lot of people pegged Ian from the beginning simply because of that relationship with Matt Ryan. However, I think these conversations are a little bit more robust than that.
Yeah. And for you, Free, it's down to 2. Are you looking at Cunningham or Liipfert as the guy who gets the job?
Well, it's virtually a coin toss at this point in time, but I'm leaning with Maria that I think it's more James Liipfert at this point in time. Again,
a lot of lip leaning going on right here.
52-48 when it comes to James Liipfert getting the job. So slightly leaning in that direction. And the main reason for that is, as everybody else has said, Ian Cunningham has been the guy since the beginning, but it's basically been 3 weeks since the Falcons first talked to him as, interview him for the president of football. And they thought highly enough of him to potentially take on that role. Although we all know that it was, Matt Ryan's job from the jump. But the fact that we're still 3 weeks in and the Falcons haven't named him as GM, maybe it's just, the Falcons want to appear thorough and want to give everybody the due diligence, all that stuff. That's definitely a possibility. But the fact is that, now that we're 3 weeks later and he still hasn't been named a GM, makes me believe that, there, not to say there's something wrong with Ian Cunningham, but there may be something that is pushing them in a different direction, and presumably that is the James Liipfert direction.
Someone's making it hard for them to choose Ian Cunningham. That's all we're saying is that, you can be really high on somebody. It's similar to everybody that's listening that's had a job interview, right? Like, you can feel really good about what you just did. You walked in there, they're like, oh, we love them. But then they have another interview and they're like, oh, wait a second. we might love them a little bit more. And that happens a lot. And so that's kind of what I feel like is at play here. So I think Aaron makes a great point.
Yeah, and I think it was very telling that last week on our squad shows, we just knew that at least on Thursday squad show, we would be reacting to Stefanski's introductory press conference and the introductory press conference for the GM, coupled with the fact that Senior Bowl week was this week in Mobile, and you want to have some of those members of that team in place in order to take advantage of some scouting, right? And when that didn't happen over the weekend, and then we got word that there were 2 finalists, it's like, yeah, this might be a little bit more wide open than we had anticipated. So we shall see how this plays out and who actually ends up being the third person in the triumvirate. But speaking of the Senior Bowl, I know Jarvis, Aaron, poor Maria, bless her heart, she's just been snowed in, up, down, and around at 11 o'clock.
Do not manifest that. Tenitra, no.
Yeah, I'm talking about last week. Like this,
yeah.
What did you say? 9 straight days?
Yes. We're in stretch here. And if you didn't see, go look at my very cool NFL sheets that I bought to the office.
Yes. So literally, she has been like under a rock for obvious reasons, but Jarvis and Aaron somehow braved it, went to Mobile, and just wanted to ask you guys, who stood out for you?
Aaron, you want to go?
So
first?
Nobody stood out, Jarvis? No.
Well, I was gonna let Jarvis go.
Disconcerting.
No.
Go
ahead.
I was just gonna say I've been focusing on the wide receivers and corners this week, which is so weird that we're not talking trenches in the Atlanta Falcons at a Senior Bowl. But there's been a couple of small school guys. This Tyron Montgomery guy from John Carroll has really impressed me. And like the more I learn about him, he was a basketball player. He was like a walk-on at LSU to play basketball, and then decided he had to move back home because his mom got sick, back to Texas, and then basically decided, I'm going to try football. And basically started playing football like 3 years ago. And he's out here playing a Division III school at John Carroll, comes out here to the Senior Bowl, and he's cooking, power 4 corners all throughout the practice week. And it's like, okay, this guy is very intriguing. So he's a guy that has really kind of stood out to me over these last couple of days at the wide receiver position. And, with the corners, Colton Hood, projected first-round pick out of Tennessee, is certainly a guy that's played well. Chris Johnson, another guy that's projected to be a high pick, where first, second round, we'll see out of San Diego State, has also been another sort of impressive cornerback this week.
And for me, I tried Aaron's philosophy to kind of focus in on the wide receivers and corners, but I stopped lying to myself maybe like 2 minutes into that thought. And Aaron can vouch for that. For me, I've been looking at the defensive tackles, right? Like, because I feel like the Falcons are in a space where they need a guy that can really take pride in stuffing offensive linemen and stuffing running backs and creating this big old wall where they have to bounce it outside. And of course, James Pierce Jr. and Jalen Walker be out there waiting on them to make the tackle for a loss. But so the big guy that I really focused in on that I like, Tim Keenan, defensive tackle out of Alabama, 6 foot, 330 pounds, the perfect size, right? Just a guy that can anchor down in a double team. I just love the fact that he's really good with his hands as well. Another guy, not necessarily a run stuffer, but he can get off. GTFO, I feel like Nate Ollie would like this guy, and that's Zane Durant, a D tackle out of Penn State, 6 foot, about 290 pounds. So he's a little bit lighter in the dumper, but when you're talking about a guy that can come in on you and third down and line up and get after it and get after that quarterback, Durant has done that. He's very good in one-on-ones. He actually went up against Keelan Rutledge, the guard/center, excuse me. He probably swung on me if I said that. That has showed really well. And when Durant and Rutledge went up against each other, those guys were, getting after it. And Durant, just the get off is just it's so prevalent. It is really something to watch. So yeah, that's where I've been focused. I try to change my mindset, but I just can't do it. It's in my soul.
But actually,
you should have.
He kind of did. Go ahead, Free.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say Tuesday, the first practice, the one-on-ones are happening with the wide receivers and corners on one side of the field, and the offensive lineman and defensive line on the other side of the field. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go down there with the wide receivers and corners on the opposite side of the field. And Jarvis is like, I'll be right behind you. So I get down there with the wide receivers and corners, and I look behind me, and Jarvis is just nowhere to be found. And he's out there looking, front row seats, looking at the trench guys and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, well, we know what Jarvis is saying. Like, he wasn't going to turn over a brand new leaf this week.
No, I'm good. Yes.
Except, he wasn't obsessing over pass rushers. So there's
The edge
that.
guys,
So he's evolving.
There's some good ones out there now. They have, of course.
Oh yeah, they're out there, but no need to obsess over them like you've had to do for the last 4, 5, 10 years. So
thank you, I appreciate that. Yes.
Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcons Squad Show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host Aaron Freeman as your second listen. The Falcons Squad Show and Locked On Falcons are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We'll see you next time.